This is obviously a very difficult week for policing again, policing in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And I think we all are very shocked about the case of David Carrick. And I do just want to ask you, Mr. Cooke, some questions about what seems to be the systematic failure of the police system that allowed this man to carry on as a police officer. I was reading he'd been an officer since 2001. He was known, we understand, as Bastard Dave because he was mean and cruel by his colleagues. He was known to 3 police forces for allegations made against him. He sailed through his vetting in 2017. He was promoted to some of the, I think the diplomatic and the parliamentary protection service. I just wondered, Mr. Cooke, how was this man allowed to serve as a police officer for so long?
I think it is quite clear that there have been significant failures throughout this. As you'll be aware, in 2021 we did a review of vetting, misogyny and counter-corruption in forces across the country on a thematic basis. And what we saw there actually resulted in the most recommendations that we have actually issued on an inspection before, 43 recommendations, both for policing, the College of Policing and the Home Office, which have all been accepted and will all be progressed. Obviously, the offences committed by this individual are absolutely despicable, and no individual should be allowed anywhere near a police uniform who is that way inclined, and policing needs to get better at rooting out these individuals earlier. As I say, 43 recommendations made by ourselves in relation to this. I think we must bear in mind as well, an awful lot of good police officers out there doing a good job on a daily basis, but one officer like this absolutely slurs the whole profession. And it will remain with policing for some time, because as we know, it's not the first issue in relation to officers who have committed serious offences, and not just in the Metropolitan Police either. This is a nationwide issue. So that culture that is pervasive in some parts of policing needs to be rooted out. Police chiefs need to take an exceptionally strong line with it. We need to look at what we can do on a wider police system basis in relation to this. Certainly from an inspectorate perspective, we will be going back in very quickly to forces to make sure that those recommendations that we have suggested and requested, because we're an inspectorate, not a regulator, are being completed. I have to have confidence that each Chief Constable will take that seriously, will do it quickly, and not just within the timescales that we've set, but quicker than that, because it's important that the country can have good confidence and trust in policing once again. And as we know, it's at the lowest level I can remember as a police officer, and that was a 36-year career before I joined the inspectorate. So we do need to ensure that policing quickly, professionally, takes on these recommendations and does what it needs to do to start rooting out and preventing further officers and staff like this from joining policing.
So we've just been talking about David Carrick, but we know from the previous session with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, there's over 800 police officers in the Met who are being investigated for concerns about domestic abuse or sexual assaults. 800 that are being investigated in the Met.
It's a shocking statistic.
It is a shocking statistic.
It doesn't mean all 800 obviously have committed some sort of offence, but the investigations are there. Yeah. That is replicated across the country, not to that scale obviously, but there will be many more officers across the country also being investigated by good police officers and good police staff who want to ensure that policing is held to the higher standards that the public quite rightly expect.
And do you think, just particularly around the issue of women and the way that the police forces behave towards women, both internally between colleagues and how they treat women as members of the general public, what is the problem with the police service and women?
It's a very good question, and look, we all know it's not every police officer, and we know there's 40% of chief constables now are females.
Do you think the
So-
system's at fault? I mean, it seems to me, I absolutely agree, there are many, many police officers who do an exceptionally good job and are committed to serving the public. But there is a real problem, isn't there, with the systems in the police service?
I wouldn't say there's a problem, obviously, with the vetting approach in relation to this.
The culture?
The culture, undoubtedly, there are significant issues with policing culture. But misogyny is a societal issue, not just a policing issue.
That's no excuse.
No
excuse, Mr. Cooke.
I am not making that an excuse. I'm just making the point that policing obviously needs to be held to higher standards than others because of the powers that police officers have.
Yes.
But policing is recruiting quickly from the community. It needs to make sure it's recruiting the right people.
And we know that's a problem. That's an ongoing problem.
It is
in
an
your
ongoing
reporting at the end of last year, the vetting procedures, the recruitment procedures are not good enough. Can I just ask you very bluntly then, do you think that the police service is institutionally sexist?
No, I don't. And I think
Why?
if we look at the fact that we now have more female police officers than before, on the most recent intakes, 4 out of every 10 officers who were joining are female officers. Roughly 40% of the policing establishment is female and 40% of chief constables are female. So policing has come on leaps and bounds over many, many years in relation to this. Institutionally misogynist, no, I don't think it is. Is there significant issues in parts of policing? Is there significant issues with individuals and groups in parts of policing? Then yes, there is.
Okay, because I'm just looking at your report from the end of last year. We are left in no doubt that in too many places a culture of misogyny, sexism and predatory behaviour towards members of the public and female police officers and staff still exists.
Absolutely. And we did a survey of 11,000 officers and staff, and those results were shocking.
I think actually we should call this for what it is, and it's actually institutional sexism.
I will say there are significant issues in relation to sexism and misogyny.
Okay, and I also just wanted to ask you, when you came to give evidence to us last March, you made a comment that you didn't feel there was a problem with police officers being able to come forward and report colleagues who were behaving in an unprofessional way, in a predatory way, racist, sexist. You said that to us in March last year. Now, your report at the end of last year says something very different, that there is a problem with officers coming forward. So do you now accept that is the position?
My initial statement was based on my own personal experience within Merseyside Police,
Right.
because that was the first time I'd appeared before the committee as the Chief HMI. And in my previous experience, plenty of officers have come forward. Most of the misconduct issues that occurred in Merseyside were as a result of officers coming forward and actually saying there is an issue with this individual, there's an issue in how this individual is behaving. Having seen some of the issues around the country subsequently, more needs to be done to ensure that officers can feel safe in coming forward, that officers don't feel pressured not to come forward, and that policing is far more open in its ability to actually ensure that those
There is a
officers are looked
problem.
after.
Yeah,
Yes,
there is a problem.
there is.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to bring Tim Lawton in at this point.
Okay, on that point, do you cover, and if not, should you in more detail, instances of whistleblowing? Because in my experience of looking at organisations, you will ask them, do you have a whistleblowing policy? And they'll say yes. And then you ask them how many cases you had. And they'll say, oh, we've only had 2 or 3, which to me is a sign of weakness. So do we have a proper auditing of constabularies to see how many whistleblowing cases they have, the level of severity, and how they were taken forward? So that we've got some constabularies which appear to have hundreds and others that appear to have just tens, then clearly something's wrong, because there won't be that much of a difference in incidents happening from one end of the country to the other. How do you handle that?
Knowledge, every police force in the country has a confidential phone line for those who wish to bring issues to the attention of senior officers and police complaints. I don't have the figures available for how many from each force actually use that, or the number of whistleblowers, but I can certainly see if we do hold that information.
You routinely collect that information?
I don't know if we routinely collect that information or not. I'll have to check.
With respect, Mr. Cooke, it's slightly worrying then for something that is a big issue. You don't know whether that's something that you actually audit and oversee, albeit you haven't been there for more than a year.
We audit and oversee all police complaints departments. We look at counter-corruption and how well forces are dealing with counter-corruption issues as part of our biannual approach to inspecting each force. And we look at various parts of that. To ensure that what police officers are doing in those police complaints department is professional, is actually making a difference for the public that they serve. As you will be aware, decisions made in relation to vetting, on our last vetting inspection, we found 1 in 5 investigations by police complaints departments and decisions made were inconsistent or we didn't agree with them. So that is in itself concerned. That's 20% of those investigations.
So we could have some more detailed information, because I think whistleblowing is an important issue here, and if you're going to restore confidence, people need to know that if they're going to whistleblow, it's going to have some impact. So I think we'd like to see some more information on that, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Diane Abbott in 1 second, but I wondered if you could just give us your view about the current status of a police constable's employment. There's obviously some concern about whether chief constables have the necessary powers to remove officers from their position as a police constable. We understand they are different to a normal employment status. So could you just explain what that is and what you think should happen?
Police constables aren't employees. They hold a different status than that, the Crown servants. So in relation to the misconduct that goes alongside that, it's far more difficult to actually dispense with an officer's services than it is for every other employee. What goes alongside that? Obviously, police officers can't strike, so there are other benefits that go alongside that. As we're all aware, both the Metropolitan Police Commission and others have stated that the issue of having legally qualified chairs is causing a problem, and that the head of each organisation should be able to decide who should be working in that organisation. So I know the government have said that there's going to be a report commissioned in relation to this. It needs to be done quickly, in my view. We need to very quickly identify if there is a better way of dealing with these issues. The statistics don't necessarily bear out all the claims that are being made on occasion. So we do need to have a definitive, this is the situation and this is what we need to do. I know there is certainly police force around the world, where officers have a different status, such as employee, and I'm sure that is one part of what will be looked at moving forward.
And that's the internal review that the Home Secretary talked about yesterday
Yes.
in the Chamber. And do you know anything further about that? Do you know about the timescale or who's doing it?
I don't.
No, okay. All right, thank you very much. Diane Abbott.
I wanted to ask you about balancing priorities, but I just wanted to follow up briefly on some of the points my chair raised. And in response to her questioning, you said that sexism is a societal problem. I can't think of a case where in the wider society somebody's been convicted of 24 cases of rape. Are you sure you were saying that there is nothing particular about policemen and their attitude to issues of gender? Are you sure?
I can't speak for every police officer, obviously, but certainly the vast majority of police officers do not hold that sort of view and approach. But we have seen plenty of serious sexual offences happening elsewhere. It is worse when it's a police officer. I fully accept that, because police have special powers. Police have a role in society that no officer should ever be allowed to serve as a police officer with this sort of mentality. I fully accept that. But what I can't accept is that every officer has that mindset.
On the culture in the police force, one of the striking things about the David Carrick case, that over 20 years, nobody ever thought there was anything that they could report. He was called Bastard Carrick. That must have been for a reason. And one of the striking things is that there was no one around him that saw that his attitude to women was problematic, and his senior officers promoted him. Doesn't that speak to a culture in the Met?
This is obviously one issue on top of a number of issues that we've seen with the Metropolitan Police Force previously. Why this individual wasn't identified earlier, either by colleagues or by senior officers or through systems and IT, I really don't know, and that's what we...
Isn't it? That's why he wasn't identified.
We can point to plenty of officers who've been identified by other officers for wrongdoing, for having the wrong approach to policing. So it's not universal.
Just last point on the Carrot case. You were saying in response to my chair, trying to rebut this idea of institutional sexism, that, you know, you're recruiting all these women, police officers and women chief constables and all the rest of it. In my experience, very often, in an organisation which is institutionally sexist or institutionally racist, in order to get to the top of that organisation, you have to internalise the culture. So having women chief constables does not mean that you cannot have a force which remains institutionally sexist.
I accept your point, and I think I've already stated that I believe there are significant issues with misogyny and sexism that need to be rooted out by policing as soon as possible.
And finally, on the very poor outcomes for rape and sexual assault cases, why do you think the outcomes are so poor and so slow?
This is a significant issue for the criminal justice system throughout, not just policing. I think it is an absolute, I'll use the words disgrace, that it takes over 700 days for a report of rape to actually start a trial. I mean, delayed justice is no justice at times. The impact of that on victims is absolutely wrong, and the whole criminal justice system needs to work together to ensure that those delays are removed and that victims do get proper justice and swift justice.
Thank you.
Interesting that rape, predominantly a crime against women, is the conviction rates and prosecution rates for that are so particularly low. I mean, again, this just feeds into my feeling around the institutional sexism within police forces. I know you don't agree with me on that, but it is just interesting when you look at the evidence. Anyway, I'm going to come to James Daly.
Can I support the chair on that? Because, and I think this is such a serious issue, and when we talk about figures in respect of rape and serious sexual offending, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors by everybody in respect of this. The major issue regarding why cases do not get to court, yes, there's issues with delays, is because the police officers do not refer, especially rape allegations, in any significant number to the Crown Prosecution Service. Would you agree with that? That's where the major problem is. We have a charge-out rate of 1.5% for rape.
I think there are complex issues involved in relation to rape itself and the prosecution of rape. It is very much for the Crown Prosecution Service and policing to work together to vastly improve the number of charges going forward. I remember a time when the actual CPS and policing used to actually sit in the same room and work together, which made the issues of discussing difficult cases far more easy than it is today. Now, I have worked with, and my staff on inspections are seeing people who are absolutely committed to getting as many rapists before the courts as possible. So I really don't think this is a misogyny issue at all.
Well, can I just say, Mr. Cooke, that I actually think that, and I'm sorry to put this bluntly to you, you're a man who's always spent a lot of time, you spent over 30 years in the police force, and some of your answers here today appear to be not an impartial assessment of the police, but actually a defence of the police. We're asking you questions here. 1.5%. Forget about if what forces should be doing is being sat in the same room as a lawyer, then it doesn't take a genius to work that out, and the fact that that's not happening is outrageous. I get back to my point. It is this. The major issue regarding matters getting to court is that police officers are not referring allegations of rape to the Crown Prosecution Service. We have a charge-out rate of 1.5%. in my view, I've looked for all sorts of reasons for this. I agree with what the chair has just said. There has to be an attitude of misogyny within the police force that is allowing all of these cases not to be prosecuted. All of these victims who are coming forward are not even getting the chance to have their case assessed by the Crown Prosecution Service. And I'd just like to know what your recommendation is, what you think we should do to change that. Because, let's be blunt about it, not all of those cases are, people are not coming in and lying or not telling the truth. It is because the police are taking a deliberate attitude to female victims of crime. Isn't it? It's got to be.
No, look, I'm not being defensive about policing. I accept fully, and have accepted for some time. I just mentioned the words, it's disgrace, it's taken so long to get to court and not enough people are being prosecuted, okay? So this isn't about my independence or not. This is about a very complex issue that policing are doing the best, in my view, to improve. It is not happening quickly enough. I'll give you one example. Operation Soteria is the approach that's being taken in some forces around the country as a pilot, being led by Avon and Somerset, where we are seeing increased numbers of charges in relation to rape as a result of focusing on the offender. Changes in relation to how rapes are investigated, such as being less intrusive for victims, so victims feel more comfortable going through the whole process, are essential. And the way it's done at the moment and what policing needs to do to actually be as intrusive as it is in relation to victims, in my view, is quite clearly wrong.
How do you think the police treat vulnerable victims who come forward? So victims who may have substance addictions, may have mental health issues, may have all sorts of challenges in their life, because those are the people, the most vulnerable, who are less likely to get their case in court. So not only do we have a situation where, in my view, there is rampant misogyny in the consideration of these matters, but secondly, if you are vulnerable, if you have challenges, if you need support, you are not going to get your case even referred to the Crown Prosecution Service.
That's just not true.
That's not true. You are saying that's not true and that's not happening.
No, I'll refer you to my previous force. There an awful lot of work was done with the specialised unit working with sex workers and drug users who were reporting sexual offences, and we're having good success in relation to bringing those cases forward. So that happens. That's not just a Merseyside police issue, that's an issue across the country. Is it as good as it should be? No. But to say that no sex worker, no vulnerable person is going to get their case to court just isn't true.
Tell me this, Mr. Cooke, 1.5% charge-out rate, what should the charge-out rate be?
I can't put a figure on what that charge rate should be. We all know it should be more than that. We all know that victims should be getting justice far more often than they are in relation to rape and serious sexual offences. But I can't possibly put a number on that.
I'll ask you one final question in respect of the balance to be struck in resource terms between offences of high harm such as rape and the policing of other matters such as theft and burglary. What's your assessment of how police forces throughout the country are balancing those responsibilities?
I think it's always a difficult choice where limited resources are placed. As we know, demands increased on policing. I recently did a spotlight report that identified that the outcome rate for the likes of burglary and robbery were far too low. The outcome rate overall for crime, so the charge rate overall for crime, was 15% in 2014. It's now 5%. So there's been significant reductions in people being charged across all different types of offences. Balancing those different difficult decisions on a daily basis is for chief constables and police and crown commissioners to do. What can't be denied is that irrespective of what the offence is, in my view, that charge rate is too low.
Okay. I mean, this is a very pitiful state of affairs, and can I just ask you to leave us with this? What is it that you are telling the police, or what is it that you are recommending in terms of, we talked about rape and serious sexual offending, but other offences, what are you recommending? Because it's either incompetence, there's got to be some reason for this. The public are being ill-served by their police force at this moment in time. And so you are the inspector, there must be some recommendation you can tell me now that's going to improve the situation. Or is it just having better people who know what they're doing in place?
There are numerous issues in policing at the moment, as we're aware. One is, firstly, shortage of detectives. Secondly, there is a very inexperienced workforce and inexperienced supervision. Let me give you an example of that. In 2014, 10% of officers had under 5 years service. In 2024, that will be 38%. So that experience isn't as it was 10 years ago. So there are significant issues around police tradecraft, about experience, professionalism, about good supervision in relation to policing. There's also the issue of the 20,000 uplift, which is a good thing for policing and is welcomed by policing, but that brings its own challenges alongside that as well. We have made numerous recommendations, as I say, 43 in relation to vetting, significant number of recommendations in relation to rape, but there is no magic bullet for this. Policing is at a time, very difficult time, a time of, some would say, crisis in relation to its ability to ensure that the public are kept as safe as we would like them to be. It is a difficult time.
Okay, I'm going to just bring in Marco Longley very quickly, and then I'm coming to Simon Fell.
Two very brief questions, if I may.
Very
the first
brief,
is around the 800 officers that are currently being investigated. Are they currently able to serve as police officers?
I don't know the breakdown in numbers in relation to how many are suspended, how many are on other duties or kept from the public.
I would be very alarmed if 800 officers are being investigated and we don't know clearly what the outcome of those investigations are going to be, if they're able to use their warrant card, if they're able to exercise their duties as police officers as we speak. That is a frightening situation to be in. So are you not able to say whether they are suspended from duty?
I'm not ducking that question. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has said there are 800 officers under investigation, 800 to 1,000 he actually said under investigation. How many of those are suspended and how many of those are restricted is a matter for the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. I don't have those figures.
We'll write to him and ask, yeah.
The second
Very
point was in
quickly,
response to
yeah.
questions from the Chair and I believe also from the member for Hackney, which was around your response to the point around misogyny. If it's not misogyny, I mean, we had Dame Cressida Dick as the Met Commissioner here in London when a lot of these awful things were happening. Is it just a question of competence?
There is an element of lack of experience in investigation. On occasion, there'll be lack of competence.
Are you saying that Commissioner Dick lacked experience?
No, which I thought you were talking about the investigations themselves, not Commissioner Dick.
Well, if this is a cultural thing and there are systemic problems, we often say that culture and systematic problems need to be addressed as a question of leadership.
Yes.
So are we saying that leadership is inexperienced?
Leadership across policing, there are some very good leaders, undoubtedly, but leadership is intrinsic on how competence and the level of standards and values that force holds. Yes.
It might be experienced, but it's still incompetent.
You can still have, yes, you can still have experience and incompetence, absolutely.
Okay, Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to touch on some of the future challenges for policing, if I may. Your predecessor highlighted that economic crime is on the rise. He described fraud as having exploded. RUSI have recently come out with a report saying that it's an epidemic. Professor Mark Button has called it a tsunami. Lots of exciting words there suggesting it's getting worse and worse and worse. Is it a high enough priority for the police at the moment?
No, fraud isn't a high enough priority. I think we're all aware 40 to 50% of crime is fraud. 1% of officers are engaged on dealing with fraud. I don't believe it's an issue we'll be able to investigate our way out of without significant resources being put into fraud investigation. So it is very much for me about how we prevent it, how we work with other parts of both public and private sector to actually prevent large parts of this fraud, and how we hold not just policing but others to account for what is a massive problem, fully accepted. Are police doing enough around it? No. Will they say they don't have the resources to do much more about it? Yes. That is a matter for government to decide whether significant resource should be put into the investigation of fraud.
What does good look like for you?
Good looks like a significantly less number of frauds being reported. Good looks like the organisation of those behind the fraudsters being investigated, much like serious and organised crime, much like county lines. Because a lot of these frauds that we see are of a type Good for me, it looks like a banking system and a financial system that does far more than it does now to actually prevent these issues happening. And good looks like those in charge of tech companies such as your Googles, your Amazons, etc., who are doing some good work around this, doing even more around this to prevent those fraudsters actually being allowed to use the internet to do this.
We have, thank you. We have a wide range of organisations operating in the fraud space at the moment. City of London Police is a lead force, ROCUs around the country, Action Fraud, NFIB, public-private partnerships you've mentioned already. But we also have a challenge that a lot of the legislation in this space is quite specialist, and not all officers are trained up in it, understandably. To your mind, is this a training and skills issue, or is it around the structures that we have to operate with currently to deal with the problem?
I think the conversation needs to be had around the structures to deal with this. I mean, a response officer carrying a busy workload is working 3 shifts is not the right person to be carrying frauds in this country. It needs someone who's got a better level of expertise than that. I think we also need to look at the fact that a lot of the fraud issues are exceptionally complex, and are we recruiting the right people to actually deal with those types of frauds? Again, the Commissioner Mark Rowley, was a speech that he gave last week, mentioned the fact that he'd like to recruit different people to be police officers. Whether those recruited people are police officers or not police officers, we certainly need to ensure that we're getting people with different skills to investigate some of these difficult frauds as a country, because within policing, people aren't necessarily recruited with that sort of mindset. So we need to look at how we can better capture people who understand those systems better. It is a very difficult market because policing will not pay as much as private industry, so a lot of the good people who policing do take on after a short period move into private industry for far more money than they get within policing. So I know that the City of London Police are working with tech companies and financial institutions to see if we can have some sort of reciprocal approach to loaning staff either way, with different skills to come in and assist how police investigate. But I'll come back to the initial point. The scale is such that prevention, not investigation, has got to be at the forefront of this.
I'm minded to agree with you there. Just looking at funding challenges, which are obviously quite difficult at the moment. In the US, they have, and in other countries, they have the model where economic crime agencies can hang on to some of the funds they capture and reinvest that in economic crime policing. Is that something you're interested in?
I mean, policing does keep some money as part of POCA and seized assets, etc., percentage of such with CPS and others. Yes, I think it is an incentivisation for policing to do more around fraud. I think we need to be careful that they don't chase the money as opposed to chasing what the biggest risks and threats are that are in their force areas or in the NCA or in the ROCUs.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Paula Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mr. Cooke.
Morning, Paula.
You were talking about, in 2014, 10% of officers had under 5 years experience, and you've said yourself that by 23-24 that's going to be around 38%. Given what you said about lack of experience around standards and values, etc., what impact do you believe that this inexperience in the force is having on the general public?
I think that inexperience does have an impact. When you have such a young workforce, and quite a lot of, when I say young, it is young and inexperienced at times now, certainly with PEQF and the police degree, a lot of 18-year-olds are joining to go through that. I think it does have an impact. I think what it needs and what it requires is good supervision on top of that, very strong standards and values implemented by chiefs and commissioners to ensure that both, firstly, people are properly trained in relation to the role, but just as equally as being trained, have that ethics, values, standards drilled into them from day one. We look across the country and we see some very good forces who are doing some very good work. I'll raise the issue of Humberside, the highest grades ever in an inspectorate inspection. where we've seen what can be done from a force that in 2017 was engaged to a force that is now the best performing force in the country. For me, that is all about the culture that's been instilled, the standards that have been instilled, and the leadership that's been shown throughout the organisation, and others need to replicate similarly.
Why is that model of good practice not being replicated across the country?
That is part of the role of the inspectorate, and we are highlighting the good work that's been done by Humberside to other forces, and there are other good forces as well who are doing well. But we have a force-3-force approach that is led by 43 different chief constables, 43 different PCCs, working together with those chief constables. So together with the College of Policing, we need to ensure that good practice is drilled home. And since I've become the chief inspector, we are focusing a lot more on the good practice that policing needs to share better, disseminate, and working very much with the college to do so.
Do you think that police officers should have or be working towards a degree? Would that have any impact?
I don't think every officer needs a degree. Some of the best officers I've worked with didn't have degrees. Police officers need high standards, good values, common sense, bravery, compassion. They don't necessarily need a degree on the back of it. It'd be nice for them to have a degree, but I think it also on occasions it stops other good people who might consider a career in policing if a degree was the only route. So I'm pleased that there's that dual route is open still in relation to joining the police.
Sorry to labour the point. I just want to go back to this lack of experience, and I agree with you about the degree issue, and I think you can have good standards, good values, common sense, etc. But given the under-resourcing of police forces, we have lost police officers over the years, and I know there has been an increase, but in terms of the net figures, it's not quite equalised. What concerns me is that we've got police officers, and around 38% with under 5 years come sort of next year. How do we embed those good practices, those cultures? What work is being undertaken? Because I accept what you're saying about Humberside and models of good practice, but haven't really heard anything about what's being done to embed those good practices and those specific cultures right across the country, really, and that concerns me. So what is being done, or what should be done?
I think our role is to ensure that MPCC and the College of Police are doing the right things to embed those cultures, and that's why we inspect in relation to what they are seeking to achieve. So if we look at Vogue, we've got Deputy Chief Constable Maggie Blythe doing an awful lot of good work in relation to ensuring that the police approach to Vogue is better than it has been previously. There's the police race action plan, which is being progressed by MPCC. What is important from an inspector perspective is that what the police say they are going to do to improve these issues, they're actually doing, which is why, if I bring us back to the vetting inspection that we discussed, we'll be going back in shortly to ensure that policing is progressing those in a timely manner, because it needs to. So if it's not, we will further report on that in relation to it. And that will identify chief constables who maybe aren't pushing these issues as strongly as they should be. But we need to ensure that good practice is disseminated, but we also need to ensure as an inspectorate that where we believe forces are failing or chief constables are failing in these respects, that we bring that to the public's attention, because that's our role.
There's a recommendation from the Police Foundation Strategic Review that a licence to practice for police officers should be reviewed every 5 years. What's your view on that?
I need to see more detail around the actual mechanics of it. I know other professions do have a licence to practice, quite rightly. I think police officer powers are such, and police have such additional powers to the rest of society, that instinctively I think it may well be a good idea that police officers should be regularly tested, that there should be regular checks, that the vetting's being completed in relation to them, and that whole licence to practice can be extended into just more than just a sort of annual appraisal that takes half an hour and doesn't necessarily do anything. I think one of the issues that we need to be aware of is that I've not looked at how successful it's been in other professions, but I'm aware in nursing and medicine and others that it is part of what they do. So instinctively, I think it's a good idea, but I'd need to see the detail.
Just on that then, because you've touched obviously on nursing and professional standards, etc. Is there any room for policing to adopt a model that would see, I don't know, similar to the NHS, where officers are on the front line and then they refer to specialist teams of colleagues in specific areas? Is there any room for that, and what's your views?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of specialist teams around policing that support those response officers, because omnicompetence, because policing is so complex now, omnicompetence is a bit of a thing of the past. When I'm really swinging a blue lamp here, but when I was a young Bobby, I mean, it was about burglary, theft, car crime, domestic violence. The complexity now for police officers is immense. So we all know how much time policing is spent dealing with mental health, which it shouldn't be. I don't want mental health professionals to deal with one of my family who are in crisis. It should be someone else doing that. So we can't expect police officers to be experts on every single thing they do. So that specialism is really important. And where we're seeing great successes in the likes of rape and similar offences is when very specialist teams are dealing with those. So yes, there needs to be a front 24/7, 999 response, but we can't expect them to be omnicompetence, and they need to have access to specialists at an early stage in relation to either advice or to taking on the role of what they're doing.
Do we have currently the skills and competence for officers to be able to deliver all those things? And if not, then what can we do to ensure that happens?
I don't think officers these days can be an expert in everything that they deal with on response.
To deal with specialist areas.
Oh, the specialist areas,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there are things like digital forensics, that not enough work has been done, there's not enough specialists dealing that part of business. There is difficulties at times of getting specially trained sexual offence officers 24/7 who are up to date with what's going on, and we've noticed that in different forces. That needs to be sorted out as soon as possible, obviously. But overall, the ability to go to a specialist to deal with a complex problem is there. Whether that's quick enough or not is a different matter.
Thank you.
Sorry, why do you think that not all police forces have specialist sexual assault officers and teams? Because that's one of the recommendations we made from this committee in our report. And I still do not understand why some forces don't just say, absolutely, this is a no-brainer, we should have this.
I think every force do have specially trained sexual offence officers. Not every force has actually had special units for investigating rape and sexual offences. Absolutely, I agree with you, it's the right thing to do.
You can't do anything about making them establish these units.
We're an inspector, we make recommendations. I can't force a chief constable to do anything, they have operational independence.
Just when everybody accepts this is the way forward, and Operation Soteria is saying this is the way forward, and the Home Secretaries, or previous Home Secretaries, have said this should happen, it just seems bizarre that police forces don't have these units. Anyway, Carolyn Harris, is there anything you'd like to ask at this point? No? Okay. Tim, anything you want to come in on?
Can I just some general questions? Yeah. Which is the best constabulary in the country at the moment, which is the worst?
The highest graded is homicide police. 6 outstandings as part of its 9 categories. The force that's been in engagement in special measures for the longest is Cleveland, and has been for some time. There is a new chief constable in place there who is doing some good work in drawing a team together, and we're seeing some slow improvements in relation to that force. As you know, there are 6 forces currently in enhanced engagement with the inspectorate. That's not because they are failing throughout the force, but because there are certain issues that we are concerned about in relation to the way they are delivering their business.
Okay, so why is homicide the best and Cleveland the worst?
There are numerous reasons in relation to Cleveland. I'll start with Cleveland. Cleveland has had too many chief constables over a short period of time. There's been a long history in relation to corruption with a small c, both public service and within that police force. It is a small constabulary that is underfunded. It has metropolitan problems, but basically a rural budget to support that. It has the highest firearms crime rate in the country, one of the highest violence rates. It is an area of significant deprivation, so more mental health issues, more people below the poverty line. So there are a number of things that come together to make that a difficult force. Plus, it is not an
It's sort of
attractive
inevitable,
force.
is what you're saying. Because of the nature of the territory, it's inevitable that it's always going to be a struggling force.
It's not inevitable. It's under-resourced. It's underfunded, in my view. It is also subject to, because of its location, it is not the number one promotion that police officers might aspire to. So it does struggle to recruit senior officers who want to work in that area. So there are a number of reasons for it. In relation to Humberside, why Humberside? Very good process, very good systems, very good leadership. A force that is totally on track with what the Chief Constable wants them to do. A force that's been innovative in relation to its approach to a number of parts of business, for instance, mental health. Right person, right care approach has been adopted by the rest of the country as we speak. That's in relation to ensuring that police officers aren't tied up for significant periods of time dealing with mental health issues or dealing with NHS issues, but can get back to doing what they should be doing, what the public would expect them to do. So throughout the force is well led. It is resourced sufficiently, although the Chief, I'm sure, would ask for more resources, and it's providing a good service to the public of Humberside.
You see, what surprised me, and I represent the other end of the country, although my family come from Humberside originally, there's not a lot of difference between Humberside and Cleveland. I defer to the chair represents one of the seats there in terms of some of those factors you've given for why Cleveland are a basket case, because they're environmental, poverty, social factors. There's no excuse for Cleveland to be at the bottom and Humberside to be at the top in terms of what it's dealing with. And they're excuses, aren't they? Because the reason Cleveland is a dud force and Humberside is a good force is because of the way they approach policing. It's not what they have to deal with, the sort of people they have to deal with, the social circumstances they have to deal with, because there are many other forces up and down the country who are doing a really good job in challenging areas. But they don't use as an excuse, we've got a challenging clientele that we have to look after, frankly. So I'm more interested, Mr. Cooke, as to why, of the police's own making, are they failing in Cleveland and succeeding in Humberside? You've mentioned leadership, and continuity of leadership is clearly a key factor. What's it going to take, and what do you think your role as inspector is, to turn Cleveland into a Humberside?
It's a very good question. I will answer it and say it's not one reason why Cleveland is failing. It is a number of reasons. That leadership is exceptionally important, and we've seen what good leadership can do in Humberside. The problems in Humberside and Cleveland are similar. The resourcing in Humberside is more than Cleveland. We need to ensure that the right people are encouraged to go and work in Cleveland. There are an awful lot of good police officers at all levels who are working in Cleveland at the moment and doing a good job despite the issues that they face. The new Chief Constable will do all he can to improve that force, and the Home Office are currently working with Cleveland to identify if there is a solution to either resourcing or funding that they can come to. So the whole of the policing sector, including College of Police and MPCC, are supporting Cleveland. The progress there has been very slow, as I mentioned. I think it's 7 Chief Constables over a very short period of time, which obviously the lack of continuity for the staff is a real issue. So Cleveland does need to get better, undoubtedly. Will it reach a Humberside level of good? Not without further resourcing, in my view.
Okay, I'm interested in what you think your view in all of this is. When I was Children's Minister, I was responsible for Children's Services departments who were inspected by Ofsted, and some of them would fail and some of them would be good or outstanding or whatever. One of the approaches we took is where you had outstanding authorities, we would suggest they seconded some of their officers, and in some case did a mentoring between political leadership as well to those failing authorities to find out what they're doing well there and how they might apply it to the failing authority. What happens for police constabularies, and you have a role as the inspector to say you need to set up some sort of mentoring partnership programme so that the stardust of Humberside can rub off on Cleveland or whatever it might be?
Mr Lawton, we've done all of that. I have no power to second officers anywhere across the country. That is, each police force is independent. The National Police Chiefs Council can't make a senior officer move to a different constabulary. Maybe that's what should be able to happen. I might happen to agree with you. I think that we should be parachuting good people in to some of the areas that are struggling, but I have no power to do so. I've suggested that previously. I've worked closely with the Home Office in relation to it and solutions for this.
You made that recommendation in one of your annual reports?
No, I haven't actually completed an annual report yet.
Okay, will you make that recommendation in your next annual report?
As part of my annual report, I will be reporting on how I think what we need to do to improve those forces who are not, or are currently engaged and are not necessarily in a position to aspire to adequate, good or outstanding.
Okay, but will you suggest this as a proposal, given that you, on the sound of it, agree with it?
I think the Inspectorate should have more power in relation to what it can do. I think there should be the opportunity for police officers to be moved to different parts of the country where that requirement is, or even there should be some consideration in relation to what we do with local authorities of a sort of commissionership approach on occasion if that's required. But we can't allow forces like Cleveland to be engaged for 5 years now, I think it is. That is too long. Everything...
That's a yes, but yes.
You'll consider it?
I'll certainly consider it, yes. And it's a conversation that I've had previously.
If I recall, though, Chief Constable of Humberside did go off to Cleveland for a period of time. I don't know if that was just a relationship between the two forces.
It was a relationship between two forces.
Yeah.
It was he basically said, yes, I will go for a short period of time till the new chief's in place, and he then was responsible for being in charge of two forces.
But that was just them deciding to do that.
He did that
themselves.
out of
Yeah.
goodness of heart as opposed to anything else.
We have a lot of goodness of heart in the Humberside area, yes. Yeah.
You do, and you have a very good police force as well.
A very good police, yes, considering where it's come from and where
Absolutely.
it is today, it's made remarkable progress, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely,
I
and I
agree.
should pay tribute to the Chief Constable. I'm going to take Carolyn Harris because she hasn't spoken yet, and then Marco, I think you might have any questions, and then back to Tim.
might come back in.
So, okay.
I just wanted to follow on from the Cleveland conversation and ask, you talked about it, well, you actually made it sound like the graveyard of police ambition. How much influence would the PCC have on the structure and encouraging a change? Because they are a consistent.
Is it?
Yeah, the current PCC is doing his best in relation to attracting people in. There's no financial incentive is one of the key issues because they can't pay someone more because it's a really difficult place to work under the police regulations. So that's it is the same wherever you work. For an assistant chief constable, basically you are on the same rate of pay unless you get London allowance. So it is more attractive to work for many people in a force that is not so challenging as Cleveland. So they do struggle to attract people in. I wouldn't call it a graveyard, just for clarity, but it is a significantly difficult policing environment at the moment.
Thank you. Mark Olongi, were there any questions you'd like to ask? We're just about to finish at
I
quarter
think-
two.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
I wanted to bottom out a little bit more the whole issue around behaviour and culture. In your recent inspection on vetting and culture found that women were fearful of reporting colleagues with officers and staff who experienced prejudicial or improper behaviour, saying that this was rarely challenged. What I find is also very rarely challenged is women who have been abused, who are not getting the service they should be getting from the police force, and when they do come forward, they're the ones that are being made to feel guilty. So when they're coming to a force that is actually meant to be supporting them, they are inevitably finding themselves in even more difficult situations. So what is it that needs to change, and how confident are you that things will change?
I think in relation to internally, female officers coming forward need to be reassured that senior officers will actually take the right action in relation to their complaints. And as we've said previously, on our vetting inspection, we did see that not all of the decisions that had been made in relation to misconduct were satisfactory. So there needs to be a far stronger approach to supporting both female officers and staff internally in relation to this. Externally, I agree with you. Victims should always be the priority for policing. That keeping victims informed, that ensuring that the right people with the right skills are and the right compassion are looking after these individuals is exceptionally important.
Can I come in on this? I'm sorry, because we all know what needs to happen. We all know what should happen, and you're basically saying, yes, you're right, this shouldn't happen and this should change. But my question is, what needs to happen for that change to take place, a change in behaviour, and how confident are you in that happening? We know what needs to happen. How will it happen, and how confident are you?
We need to continue to inspect police forces to ensure that chief constables, senior officers are doing the right things to ensure that culture changes, that people are taken seriously, that the right systems are in place right across the country in relation to identifying those people, both internally and externally, who are committing these offences against either colleagues or members of the public. We will continue to do that as an inspectorate. Am I confident it will improve? Yes, I'm confident it will improve. We need to ensure as an inspectorate we're doing all we can together with others across the policing system that that improvement is quick and does not take years and years.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just ask you just a couple of very quick questions? There seems to be some speculation in the press about whether those officers who were involved in the vetting or saw events during the course of David Carrick's career at the Metropolitan Police and didn't report or allowed the vetting process to just go through and allow him to carry on. There seems to be some speculation about whether those officers should be brought to task. What do you think about that?
Without knowing the exact details, Chair, it'd be really difficult to comment on that. That is a matter for the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. And as I say, without knowing more about the exact situations in relation to what, on those 9 occasions, brought this individual to light, it would be wrong for me to comment.
But you think it's something that should be looked at?
There are those who commit offences and those who allow others to commit offences knowingly. I think I am no doubt this will be part of what Lady Angelini looks at as part of the review that she's going to do in relation to this.
Right, okay. And I just also wanted to ask you about the inexperience of the police service going forward, and you talked about the quite striking numbers, over 30%, yes, of people with less than 5 years service. So could you just, how did we manage to get ourselves into this position that we seem to have lost so much experience and knowledge within the police, and we're ending up with a very large chunk of officers with limited experience? So just tell me how have we ended up in this position?
And this started point 2010 austerity and the significant reduction in police officer numbers. Now trying to get back to those police officer numbers obviously is an issue. I would add on top of that police officers in real terms as a police constable have basically had a 20% pay cut since 2010 compared to what they earn now. So policing is not a vastly attractive proposition for a lot of people, particularly in areas where there's a high cost of living. Add on to the fact that the respect that people have for policing over the last few years has diminished. Add on to the fact that in private industry people are paying more for police officers. For instance, train drivers get significantly more than police constables, and that has become a favoured profession for a number of Metropolitan Police officers, etc. So it is a very difficult time to recruit and retain police officers of sufficient standard to ensure that the public are kept safe, and that's an issue for all of us across the system. It's an issue for government. We need to be paying very close attention to this, because that 38% next year, and we are getting more experienced officers leaving, not just younger officers, the retention of young and senior officers is a concern. So it's something we should all be concerned about.
So when I was younger, joining the police was seen as a career that you do for 30 years. that was what you were going to spend your life doing. So that's not how it is for people now?
No, but even on that point, I mean, you know, when you join the police, when I joined the police, I didn't do it because anyone 30 years I got a pension. A lot of police officers join because they feel they have a vocation for policing, that they want to make a difference for the public, they want to be public servants. But the pension arrangements have changed in relation anyway, so, you know, if you decide you're going to join as a police officer, it's a totally different pension arrangement now. But at the moment, confidence and trust in policing is at such an extent that why would you want to be a police officer? You've got to have a real vocation to be a police officer, particularly, as I've mentioned, the other issues that go alongside that. And that concerns me greatly, because I want the best people possible protecting not just my family, but families across England and Wales.
Okay. Thank you very much for your appearance before us today. I'm looking forward to the next time you're in front of us. I'm sure we'll see what happens with policing and the very sad situation it's in currently, and let's hope there's improvement. But thank you very much this morning for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. About defending the police.
Good morning. This is our second panel. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves to the committee. Would you like to start, Steve?
Good morning. Stephen Hartshorn. I'm currently the chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Harvi, the Vice President of the Police Superintendents Association.
Thank you very much, and you're very welcome. I think you were sitting at the back of the room during that first session with the Chief Inspector. I'd like to start off really by asking both of you about the current situation in policing, and obviously this week the really dreadful news about David Carrick as a serving Metropolitan Police Officer until just yesterday. And my view that we have to recognise that the police service is institutionally sexist. I just wondered if we could just have a little bit of quiet in the room. Diane, could we? Sorry, thank you. So I was just asking about if you could give me your view really on the situation as you see it. I don't know which one of you wants to start.
Happy to start first.
Yes, thank you.
I guess my starting point is, as a police officer, to hear what's happened this week is horrific, and it makes me feel sick. If I'm being honest, I have 29 years service in policing, and I feel that we've let the victims down, and I'm really sorry as a service that we have done that. I don't think there's any police officer that wouldn't find that abhorrent in terms of what's happened, and we really need to get to the bottom and make sure we root out any officer that has those kind of views and commits those horrific crimes. You asked the question at the start, do we think it's institutionally sexist as a service? Based on my level of service, I think there is an issue in policing, and it isn't necessarily confined just to the Metropolitan Police. We also have to recognise that it isn't restricted to certain ranks, and we have to definitely understand that. But my view also is that we have a number of really good officers at every level that come to work every day, as Mr. Cooke has referred to, that want to do a good job for their communities, for their fellow colleagues that they work in, and you want to stand up and make sure that when victims and witnesses, both internally and from communities, report this, that they are able to be supported, and we root them out.
And I think we all accept there are many, many officers who are doing a very good job as police officers, keeping us all safe. I guess, do you think the system, is it systematic, the problems, rather than individuals? Is it the system that's failing, and wrapped around that, the culture?
So my view would be there are two areas in relation to this. The first is around the culture, and that we need to make sure that we create that psychological safety for people to be able to come forward, and certainly from an internal perspective, that we allow and listen to people's lived experiences, and based on those lived experiences we are looking at our systems and processes to see are they fit for purpose to allow people to come forward. We then need to look at a whole system review of all of our processes. We've talked earlier on about the recruitment, the selection, the vetting process, the misconduct, and just make sure that all of those are robust. People have the right training that are investigating those areas of business and crimes. And that we are also timely, because it's unacceptable that people have to wait a significant amount of time, and particularly for victims from community that are coming forward, that we have the right processes and the right support, we have the right training, and that our officers are skilled, and show that empathy, that victims are believed, that we carry out thorough investigation and our internal processes are robust, but also, and I think Sir Mark Rowley referred to this at a previous committee, that we don't have biases in our decision making.
We do at the moment.
I think Sir Mark Rowley referred to that there have been instances, certainly within, obviously he makes reference to the Metropolitan Police, where some of those have disproportionately impacted on individuals.
And you're talking about, say, leniency within misconduct hearings, that certain officers would be treated more leniently than others?
I think it's about that consistency. We need to make sure all the decision making is robust, it's transparent, and there is clear rationale for why decisions have been made. But equally, when we are, in terms of sanctions, as you refer to it, that they are both transparent and proportionate, and there is consistency across all forces. It's not just particular to one force, that is across all 43 forces.
Thank you.
Good morning. If I might echo the sentiment from Harvi as well and offer an apology to the victims, but also to the wider public for the loss of confidence in policing. That's on behalf of every right-thinking, decent police officer that is absolutely appalled by recent events. And I just feel it's incumbent to get that on the record now, because we are absolutely disgusted by what has happened. And certainly within the Police Federation of England and Wales, we'll be pushing for the changes that are needed to try and rectify that, to get back the confidence that is so definitely needed by yourselves, but also the wider public.
What are those changes?
I think initially you've got to look at leadership. It was already commented on previously that leadership starts at the top. We talk about culture. There does need to be cultural change. There needs to be a proper victim-led approach, that when somebody comes forward as a police officer but also a member of the public, they are supported properly. Because the difference, I suppose, if you look at public crime, is that a victim may report a crime and they might not know we'll have to work with that person. Whereas if you report an offence against a colleague, that's in the same environment, so there might be elements of having to work together on the same team, and that causes immense pressures, probably more so in rural areas, but it's not alien to the metropolitan environments as well, because policing is a team, it's a family in itself, and people will make comments ill-advised. It is incredibly difficult from dealing with police officers that come to me for representation and support to stand up and be counted. Quite often they say, I just want this to go away and to stop. But obviously, we then want to make sure that that behaviour is stopped properly. And part of the issues that we're trying to find and do away with now is whenever we take a Chief Constable to an employment tribunal, we don't want any COT3s or a non-disclosure order imposed. We want it to be an open and transparent process, so that if we have won the case and the person, the officer we represent, is okay with having their name out there, they can say, this is the type of behaviour that we reported, we've challenged it, we've sadly had to take it to an employment tribunal, we have won. That is the kind of culture we need to stop, because if you shine a light on this behaviour, it will stop. There should be no hiding place for it whatsoever, and it's more about the victim-led approach for police officers in particular, to say, come forward, challenge it, be supported properly. Can we assist them with moving them to a different team, different location, but also to make sure that the perpetrators are dealt with properly but how do you have to be fair within the process, because you can have vexatious allegations, and it's about safeguarding the process for everybody. But obviously when you get patterns of behaviour, if 2 or 3 people have said the same thing and it can be proven they're significantly independent, that would raise alarm bells for me. So you can perhaps do more that way, bearing in mind the victim.
So just going back to the non-disclosure agreements, so those are where you're not allowed to say what's happened. I mean, we've had this around women who settle claims in employment tribunals around sexual harassment, and then nobody knows. So you're saying that the police use non-disclosure agreements to stop it being public, what's gone on in terms of allegations and findings around poor behaviour, assault, sexual harassment? Is that what you're saying?
They use them for a variety of reasons. It's probably more prevalent in the private sector, where again you take policing where because you report an allegation against your chief constable, you have to remain in their employment normally to continue, and that's a significant pressure on our members to have to take a chief constable to court. You know, there's internal pressures there about why you're saying that, why you're doing it, what do you want to rock the boat for. Whereas in the private sector, you'll take an employer to court because you've left and you're not happy, so you can walk away from it. If they're imposed, then we, as a starting point, it was this year, late last year, we decided that we don't want these COT3s, as the term now from the Employment Tribunal Service, say, do away with them. As long as the victim's happy, because they've got to put their name to that, and then there's the potential stigma, I suppose, for want of a better word, that so you've taken your chief to task over something which people might say isn't appropriate, but that lived experience of that victim is huge, and to challenge a police service to take it to task is an immense undertaking for anybody. You know, it takes a lot for a victim of a serious sexual assault to go to court, knowing the way that barristers potentially treat them in doing their job, to highlight the deficiencies in their evidence. It's equally as difficult for a police officer, an ET, to take their chief to court knowing if they win, they remain in their employment. And what does that look like? Is there secondary discrimination. So we did some press work a little while ago, and I said, you know, COT3s are in existence. These non-disclosure orders are prevalent in the industry, in policing. And an NPCC spokesman, unnamed, said, no, they're not. There are, and we've done an FOI to try and find out the scale of them so we can understand it in a far better way to say, look, stop, we don't need them. We need to call out the inappropriate action and behaviour of other people, be it the same rank as myself or higher officers, to see what the culture looks like, because then once you can understand it, you can deal with it.
Okay, Paula Barker.
Thanks, Chair. Ms Khatkar, if I may ask you, you have a very impressive biography. And given what we've heard today about the potential of institutional sexism, and I agree with the Chair, I think there is institutional sexism within the police, sadly. But as I said, very impressive biography. The first female superintendent, tactical firearms commander, public order bronze commander in your force. You are a woman of colour. What's your experience been? Because I think you said you've got 29 years experience. What's your experience as a woman been within the police force over those 29 years?
So thank you, first of all, for commenting on my bio. I'm sad to say that I have experienced sexism in my 29 years, but what I would say is that there have also been some positive steps towards trying to remove that, and I absolutely get that we're still not there and there is still a long way to go. And it goes back to what I've said at the start, that you absolutely need to create that psychological safety to enable, certainly internally, for women to come forward and feel that they can make those statements and allegations and that they are listened to, and that is so important. And I think, you know, being the first in so many roles, there is so much pressure in terms of that role modelling, which I think is so important as well, and particularly as a senior leader, that you ensure that you are creating that, you are increasing your colleagues' cultural competence in terms of knowledge and awareness, because it is so easy sometimes not to necessarily fully empathise and understand some of the challenges that particularly underrepresented groups may face if you're not from one of those particular groups. That's not to say that you don't have empathy, but it can or may become more difficult. So I think it is about having the courage, and I think sometimes I also recognise that it is far easier for someone who has rank to actually stand up and, you know, make your voice heard. So we also have to recognise that, because we are in a culture which there is a hierarchy, and you know, it's been really positive to hear some, you know, the things that come out from both Sir Mark Rowley about, you know, the confidential hotline that people can go to. So I think we have to look at, as I say, the various methods, having listened to those lived experiences where people can come forward, and then we have to have the right systems and processes that enable issues to be investigated, whether that's misconduct or a criminal matter, and then there needs to be that ongoing support through the criminal justice system. So, you know, I think all of those are equally important.
You will have heard, sort of towards the latter end of the first session, about sharing good practice, and obviously there's no compulsion for officers to move across forces and share that good practice. But are you called upon, given how impressive your CV is, are you called upon to share that good practice and to support or mentor women within other forces? And how can that sort of be widely shared? Because obviously, you know, there's only one of you, but how can we get that good practice shared out a bit more?
So there are a number of other fellow colleagues within the service, and you know, there is a number of coaching and mentoring schemes, both that as an association we currently are running the Future Supers programme, which is aimed at underrepresented groups from inspector and chief inspector rank, because we also recognise as an association we are that pipeline to chief officer group. We know a lot more still needs to be done to get the true diversity amongst all the ranks, particularly at senior officer level. So that is happening. It happens with working with the college. So as an association we work very closely with colleagues at the MPCC, the College of Policing, my colleague here Steve, to make sure, and Mr Cooke's department, to make sure, as you say, those areas of good practice are promulgated amongst all forces. But what I do know from our membership is that sometimes there is that lack of consistency, and that is something we definitely need to get better at in policing. So the college who set the standards, and then the HMIC that inspect against those standards and outcomes, there is consistency amongst all forces.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to come on to policing priorities in a minute, but can I come back to a comment you made just now, Mr Hartshorn, about the Carrick situation? You said quite rightly that there are all right-minded police officers are disgusted and outraged by these revelations. The trouble is, they went on in this case for 17 years. There was a culture of cover-up, given his nickname and everything else that seemed to go about him, that nobody seems to have blown the whistle, or if they did, nobody took it seriously, and that his colleagues were content to continue to work with somebody of that bad character, as it now turns out. So I'm more concerned, as I raised yesterday with the Home Secretary, not so much about this individual and the horrendous things he's done, but the people around him that allowed that to continue. So where is the mindset problem that needs to be addressed, and how are your members proactively addressing it?
I think first, to protect the investigation, I don't know the full details of who or how many people may or may not have reported his action in the past. I'm keen to understand it. I'd love to see the detailed reports that have gone on so far. In terms of asking my members what they can do, we encourage them to stand up, to stick to the police codes of conduct, that if you see inappropriate behaviour, it's incumbent on you to report it immediately. It's unequivocal, it's what it says. The first action is to go to a supervisor to document it. Once you've done that, you've fulfilled your duty. However, if you see it, you should continue to report it. I think the difficulty is once you report something, you're not always kept in the loop in the investigation, because certain things, you might say something now, it gets reported on, and you'll be forgotten about for maybe 6 to 12 months because they're progressing the investigation. They might not come back to you, they might be asking other areas, other colleagues to see what that's like. It comes down to supervision, that if you know something is taking place inappropriate, it needs to be dealt with immediately. You can't let it continue. We do have a problem with supervision in the police service as a whole. We've already talked about the attrition rates. We don't have, in my opinion, a high level of supervision. If you look at sort of standard policing, response policing, compared to specialist policing, when I was on the firearms teams, you had a higher level of supervision on there to make sure that you conduct yourself properly and professionally, but because of the level of responsibility, you had the proper oversight. If you look at some teams now, you might have 20, 30 PCs with one sergeant on the team. That's not good enough. You need proper, effective supervision so that someone at any point can call out inappropriate behaviour, feel supported by the supervisor, and then have the support of their team to go, you've done the right thing. I don't think that's always in place. We look at the entry requirements coming into policing now with the degree route, and you would hope that if you have a higher qualified, higher educated person to come in, they will feel more empowered to deal with that. That doesn't appear to be the case at the moment, so I'm keen to see what more is being done on the ethics and morality when they come into policing. But it's about encouraging the environment for people to actually step forward and make the allegations.
That all sounds fine, but it's not working in practice, and clearly it didn't work in practice here. Hence me raising with Mr. Cooke about the whistleblowing processes and how well they work or not. And it was slightly concerning that he wasn't really aware of how they do work and whether they work effectively or not. Are you confident that the whistleblowing systems within constabularies are sufficient, effective, and are actually working? And if not, why not, and what needs to be done?
I have concerns about the whistleblowing process in itself, because to get to the stage of whistleblowing, it's making a protected legal disclosure. So you can't just technically go, I'm not happy, and go out to the press or to your local MP. You're supposed to follow a stage approach to make that complaint known. It might be that some forces have low incidence of whistleblowing because they've got a really good pre-whistleblowing policy where you feel that you can go and report something effectively to a supervisor. It's then progressed by professional standards, and it might be in some forces that there aren't. And for me as a federation, when people come forward to make what they want to say, I need to go and say this out because I'm not being listened to, we have to follow the process legally to get there to protect them and their status. So from what I know, every force has a whistleblowing policy. I've not done a compare and contrast across the country to see how effective they are, and I would like to see some figures to understand. I think you mentioned 2% in one force to hire another force. I'd like to understand what is the prevalence of complaints set against the whistleblowing policy to see has it been dealt with effectively, and do they have lower complaints in certain aspects of misconduct compared to others.
Has the Federation done any work on this? Do you think it's something the Federation should be looking at more
It's something that I'll take back to my board, and we'll ask, can we look at whistleblowing? We have a very effective equality board within the Police Federation of England and Wales, and it's something we can look at to find out, because part of the work we did around the non-disclosure orders came from the equality board.
Because I think it would be useful if the inspector had got much more transparency around where there do appear to be disparities, and it is, as you say, linked into if they've got effective complaint processes that be working. Then again, let's look at some of the numbers there. But if you've got few complaints being made in that process should happen, and few whistleblowing events take place, then clearly there is a problem.
There is. If I can also add that within internally we used to have what's called a grievance procedure. And it's probably popularly known as a fairness at work process, where you go and make a complaint about somebody. I think recent reports in the last 2 to 3 years have said that most internal fairness at work processes or grievance procedures aren't effective, because it's akin to a mediation where you've got a complaint, someone says, oh, well, that's not quite right, let's not go there. It's leaving victims feeling very dissatisfied. They then become disillusioned. Then at that point, then they may go to the whistleblowing process.
That's the sort of victims. I'm talking about sort of staff on staff. Thank you. Can I come back? Chief Superintendent, I just want to ask generally about... I took my local police commissioner around one of my village centres last Friday, where we've had a particularly worrying string of antisocial behaviour, some knifings, etc., and deliberately exposed her to the punters on the street. And the most consistent thing that came up were people saying, well, I've reported such and such, but nothing's happened, or I just don't bother to report it because the police don't respond. And there were some quite cases of which I'm aware, and which I forwarded to the police anyway, where there's been some very serious violence. It's all on CCTV cameras. They can identify the people, and the police have come back and say, well, I'm afraid we can't take any further action. We haven't got the resources. Why not? When it's as simple as that, what has changed over recent years? And we can say numbers, but numbers are going back up. When you have got some clear cases of clear crime that has been committed, and a good chance of actually identifying, and this one case, and it's not isolated, actually having it on record, and the police say they're not taking any further action, that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would it?
So it's disappointing when, you know, you share that experience, and, you know, there would be an expectation that police would attend incidents. We have a grading system, it's based on threat, risk and harm, and something where a crime is committed and we have evidential lines of inquiry. There would be an expectation that police officers would pursue those lines of inquiry. I mean, obviously I can't speak for that specific case, but I also know that demand within policing, and I think Mr Cooke also referred to it, in certainly non-crime areas has had a significant impact on policing resources, and every force has to prioritise all of the incidents that are being reported to them.
What are those non-crime pressures that are taking away police crime from dealing with it's a clear crime?
Yeah. So we know from our membership that a significant amount is dealt with around mental health issues, and that could be from using a custody as a place of safety, which, you know, we would all probably agree that is probably not the best place for someone that is in crisis. So there are those situations, but also, you know, we are having to probably support some of our other public sector agencies that have also experienced austerity and have resourcing issues and implications. So, and I know there in terms of a lack of resourcing.
Who are you supporting? What other people's jobs are you having to do now as well?
So we know from our members that certainly some forces are being asked to support the NHS, so in terms of the ambulance service, which, you know, as police officers, we are not trained in terms of paramedics or any of those issues, in terms of the wait for ambulances in certain areas. I'm not saying across every force area, but those are challenges that our members provide information to us about. But equally, social services, you know, in terms of issues around young people, but also within the mental health system itself.
I think the committee absolutely gets the mental health pressures and the waste of resources when your officers take somebody to A&E, and then who've created because of a mental illness problem, and then two of them effectively having to sit there in A&E waiting all that time until they get treated, is a huge waste of resources when they're needed up on the street. I think we absolutely get that. But in terms of the criticism is that you seem to be doing an awful lot of other stuff on minor stuff, and certainly around what can be construed as hate speech, which is important, but of where there is less of an immediate threat, it might be said. Do you think you're spending too much time doing that rather than attending a scene of a physical crime that has happened, of which I've just given some examples? Are there things you should be doing less of in order to do more of for what traditionally people see police are there to do?
So it goes back to, I think, you know, we certainly in the service, we probably require that clarity of mission, because there are so many things that the police are now doing which traditionally they previously didn't deploy to. So we do need that clarity of mission, because we also know the police is often seen as that last resort in terms of service that they provide. So we do need that clarity, and I think that clarity would be welcome across all public sector organisations as well, so we can work towards a shared common goal, which would result in better outcomes for all public services. We also welcome, and I think Dr. Rick Muir refers to it as support from government, certainly for some of those with private industry. And for example, I would use the examples of vehicle crime, where they can mitigate against theft, and within the business crime area itself as well. Obviously, the police will always attend incidents where there are issues, as you've referred to, where people are using violence or, you know, instance of that, because that is the role of the police. But we certainly welcome that clarity of mission.
Okay, so clarity of mission, clarity of purpose. We took the example with the Met Commissioner when he was here a few weeks ago of the Just Stop Oil protesters, where there's widespread frustration that more is not being done to physically remove them sooner from causing misery to people trying to go about their daily lives. The Home Secretary has provided some clarity of mission on that one as to changes to make it clear where the police should be removing them. As a result of that, do you think we're going to see more Just Stop Oil protesters or type protesters causing less disruption because the police are going to move in and remove them much more quickly?
So I don't think we'll ever, it would be, I don't think I can anticipate whether we're going to see more or less protests, because that really is not probably something I can answer.
Okay, but I'm just concerned with the protests that we are going to see, whether there are more or fewer of them, whether you're going to deal with them rather more effectively, your colleagues are, as a result of what the Home Secretary said.
So I think it's important to recognise that we have to balance with all incidents of protest, the human rights for people to have that freedom of expression versus also the role of the police to protect communities, prevent serious disruption, whether that's to local communities or in that example that you referred to as the network in terms of the transport network and that disruption to other businesses. So we have to balance all of those needs when we are dealing with those incidents and be proportionate in our response as well.
You don't think the Home Secretary is saying the grounds on which the police should be removing those demonstrations, which are disproportionate and causing huge chaos to other people, is going to make any difference to the way the police deal with Just Stop Oil type protests in the future?
I don't think I'm necessarily saying that. I'm saying that I recognise that the Home Secretary has given additional powers to the police to deal with them more robustly, but it would be very difficult. As I say, we still have to apply the test of proportionality in all of our dealings.
I understand that, but Mark Rowley specifically said that the real problem over the protesters was the lack of, not the phrase he used, but your phrase, clarity of purpose. The Home Secretary has now provided much greater clarity of purpose, so I would have had expected the police to respond, thank you, that means we can now deal more effectively and speedily where it's appropriate to do so with those protesters that we've not been able to because of lack of clarity of purpose in the law. But you're not saying that.
So I would also, I'm not totally familiar with every aspect of that change in legislation in terms of the exact detail, and I would be happy to go back and provide a formal response to you, but I would still also say that regardless of the powers that the police are invested in all the areas of policing that we deal with, we still have to deal with things proportionately. We have to recognise our obligations under the Human Rights Act, and all of those are considerations of commanders within public order situations.
Thank you. Carolyn Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Economic crime and fraud has exploded, and as a victim of it, I know how extremely frustrating it is that little seems to be able to be done about it. Do you feel that your members have the resource, the training, and, as Andy Cooke has said, the financial rewards for retention to allow them to tackle and to specialise in this crime?
If it's to me, I think we've got certain officers that are highly trained in economic crime and fraud, but we always need more because it's very complex. There's joint partnerships we need to do with the banking and the financial industries to make sure we can get the data right, understand what it means. If you go back many years when we first had cards and cash machines, we were told that of course you can't have credit card fraud, or it didn't happen because the banks refused to accept it, and we said it did happen. And the problem we have that organised crime has significant funds where they can always be one step ahead. They embrace technology far quicker than policing. So for me, the ideal picture would be that every police officer has a very good grounding in understanding the basics of economic cybercrime and fraud, so they can understand when that report is made, what that actually means. Because if you try to explain high-level fraud to most frontline police officers, that's not my skill set, I don't understand it. They'll take a basic report, they might miss out on some of the fundamental detail needed for that specialist investigation down the line. So I'd like to see better training at the front end, certainly with what we're having now. But then we perhaps do need more specialist people. As Mark Rowley said, he wants to bring in specialist investigators. You can do that as a civilian, but if you want to have police powers, they have to be a police officer. But of course, that costs money. If you look at some of the recent police uplift programme statistics, it talks about recruitment from various sectors. The highest recruitment is from the tourism and commercial sector, but if you go down right to the bottom, 3% is from the IT sector. Now, if you need IT skills in policing, that's the area you need to invest in. But is there money there to say, come from being an IT specialist, an investigator, a data analyst, into policing? The funds aren't there. So there needs to be perhaps proper training within policing, as opposed to bringing in people that are trained to that level. Can we do more across the board? But we absolutely do need more specialist investigators.
Thank you. And I'll ask a question because I need to go into the chamber. But we currently have a 43 model police force. I was really surprised to realise that there was no requirement for those forces to use the same digital system. So how fit for the future is the model?
I think if you were designing it from scratch, you'd have one system across every police service in the country, because it's incumbent that we can communicate properly and effectively. There's recent reviews done, I think, by Sir Tom Windsor, that said the 43 force model in its current form isn't fit for purpose. And indeed, if you look at how a directors board is set up, you should have a board of directors of probably less than 10 people. When you've got 43 separate chief constables with their own operation independence and budgets, it's incredibly difficult to have that consistency of data and programme across the board. There are, of course, national police procurement processes where you should be procuring things properly, but to force that change in everybody, I think it's failed over the years. I don't know what would be the right level of how many forces you have. Indeed, if you look at Wales, I think Dr. Richard Lewis has said that ideally he wants one force model in Wales, but that's not been properly explored. But what does that look like against devolution for Wales? What does it look like in the United Kingdom? Again, conscious that if I say we reduce the numbers, I'm getting rid of some of my own chairs and secretaries across the country from regions, but I think there's a better way to be more effective with unity in buying, proper purchasing power to get an embedded system that we can use across everybody. But of course you have to train people in that and phase out the old system and the new. So it's an easy answer, but it's actually more difficult to implement in reality.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Paula Barker.
Thank you, Chair. So Mark Rowley has reportedly said that police officers find it galling when they have to help fill gaps during public sector strikes, when they can't take action themselves. Is that the view of your members?
Certainly for the members I represent it is, because recently I've had some anecdotal accounts sent through from our branch chairs and secretaries about police officers being asked to ferry victims to hospitals, which that takes them away from their core function being a police officer to protect and detect crime. Of course, when they then get to the hospitals, they're sat around for a long time, as with the ambulances. As member Tim Loughton's already said, they can be sat there in pairs for hours waiting to be served. It was interesting to note that during the first ambulance strike, I think end of last year, the local ambulance service in London was saying that they will wait 45 minutes and then go. To me, that should have been happening anyway, that you can literally turn up, there's the paperwork, and as long as the patient's stable, hand them over. But of course, they need the relevant resource on the receiving side to do that, not least for policing. And when we look at the impact of other public sectors taking a strike, we're called upon for public safety. You know, the railway workers go on strike. If you have large numbers of the public suddenly at the relevant train stations, that's an extra burden on police officers to do with their safety. It's right to do that, but it takes us away from what is our core function of responding to the 999 calls, but also trying to be proactive in how we can deter some of the crimes that are taking place in those very areas. So I suppose galling, it's an interesting word. It's disheartening because, of course, we do not have the right to strike as Crown servants.
Thank you. Is there anything that you
I mean, you know, as Steve has stated, we don't have the right to strike, and I actually don't think our members would want to do that. But I absolutely recognise with the other sectors at the moment. However, you know, we just want to make sure we have a really challenging role as police officers to do, and there is research from the National Wellbeing Service, Oscar Kilo, who have said that officers throughout their tenure of policing, which could, you know, span between 20 and 30 years, that they would experience between 400 and 600 traumatic incidents. That is significantly higher than most other sectors which would have single figures. figures, and I guess the staff just want to feel that they are recognised for the work that they do, the risk that they carry in all of the work and the decisions that they make, and that they are remunerated fairly and the process is fair.
Thank you. So sort of carrying on from that in terms of a wellbeing and mental health crisis in policing, what tangible difference do you think that the frontline review has made so far? Or has there been a significant difference?
So we really welcome the covenant because well-being is really important to all of our members, and you know, for the reasons that I've just outlined earlier. However, things like the blue light framework, the self-assessment, we know that whilst it was introduced in 2019, there are still some forces who haven't completed that self-assessment, and one of the key issues from all of our membership is that consistency across forces, that we have some minimum standards in occupational health across all forces, and that is invested by all forces, because that has an impact on both well-being, you know, the number of hours people then are absent from work due to sickness. So we really welcome you know, the government in terms of introducing the covenant. It's just that consistency across all forces.
When you say, I mean, this is something that was 2019, you said, and some forces haven't introduced this. What's the reason for that, or what you're hearing about the reasons for not introducing it?
So it's been introduced, but it hasn't been, not every force has completed
it,
the self-assessment. And we really need to get to that stage, that baseline, so there is that same level of service that is offered to all members and all staff across all the forces. And it should be mandated.
I suppose that was my next point. Why isn't it mandated? Because you're quite right in what you're saying, that the knock-on effect, you've just given some figures there about, you know, a career that can span 20, 30 years. Some of the situations that police officers will come into, you know, can be extremely distressing, extremely challenging, extremely dangerous. And those figures are probably not comparable to most public sector workers. So why is it not mandated?
I think I tried to tackle this question the other day when we talked about exit surveys and retention in policing, and the response I got was that it's not for the Home Secretary or the Police Minister to interfere with the Chief Constable's operation independence. However, as a PC, I take a different view. I get told by my supervisors around operation, this is what you will do because it's a hierarchical service and that's what you must do. And whilst I fully respect the Chief Constable's operation independence to do certain things, when you're looking at welfare of police officers, I think there's some things that should be mandated, absolutely. And in terms of data across the police service, we look at Op Hampshire, which is the assaults on police process, which we would like to be taken on by every single Chief Constable, because it's a new way of reporting assaults on police. If you think every year we have to provide, or Chief Constables have to provide data for the annual data returns, it's a very clunky process and it can miss things. If you adopt this new Op Hampshire process, it's simple to do. Frontline supervisors can do it. You can get daily, weekly, monthly snapshots of what's happening to your own officers at the press of a button. You can provide that to the Home Office very, very quickly so they can provide their report, because normally the ADRs, it's 12 months historical, you submit it, it's then 6 months to process and cleanse the data, you're 18 months behind anyway. So there's some resistance to adopt a new process. It's free. It's done on the Microsoft 365 platform. It's been developed. I do not understand why chiefs don't embrace it today and do it properly, and it's something we're pushing for. But in terms of other data, you look around asking chiefs to say provide a proper exit survey for police officers so we can understand the real reasons why they are leaving. Why can't that be mandated? But again, the reason was we can't do that because of operation independence. If it works for chiefs to tell me what to do to a degree, why can't the Home Secretary have the power in certain things to say this must be done, because we all know the value of data and how important it is. If we can have consistency of responses across every 43 force in the country, we can then start to make a real difference and understand it, because we know that PTSD is on the increase of police officers, low morale, high fatigue. It's the perfect storm for people, as Andy Cooke has already said. They don't want to come into policing because it's not a good place to be.
of the forces where those assessments are not completed, are you aware of the statistical data around sickness levels, people leaving, for example? Is there any data available? Because what I'm interested in is, of those forces who are doing this and you know, are exercising their duty of care to police officers and following up on exit strategy, exit interviews, etc. Is the sickness levels lower in those forces than the forces who are not doing these things?
So I don't have that data in front of me here, but again, I'm happy to provide some data to the committee, and it would be probably from Oscar Kilo, who have commissioned this work as opposed to the association. Happy to have that discussion and then report back to the committee.
That's great. That'd be really, really helpful.
We are getting a little short of
that's
time.
fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right, Diane Abbott.
Mr. Hartshorn, I'm very interested in the role that the Police Federation plays behind the scenes and the extent to which senior officers are unwilling to actually suspend people like David Carrick because they're concerned that the Police Federation might object to a member being suspended when there hasn't been a case proven, because I've seen this in the past, that people who in any other public sector organisation would get suspended when things happen that they're involved in doesn't happen with the police. And people have always put it to me, it's the Police Federation which blocks that.
Without being rude, I wish the Police Federation had that power. We don't. If a Chief Constable or their deputed authority wants to suspend somebody, they can do. We have no right to veto that completely at all. What we will do is try to make a representation based on the process that's been followed to make sure the correct processes are adhered to for fairness for everybody, to stop vexatious complaints. We will make those representations to the Chief Constable directly, or the Commissioner or the appropriate authority. They make the final decision on who is suspended, who is restricted and who is returned to operational duty. So we just make the representations. We are not the determining authority on that.
So you make your representations.
We do.
You will recall the case of Chris Cabber, who it was a young man in Streatham who was killed by a police officer, as far as anybody knows, at point blank range. Now that police officer was not initially suspended, he was put on duties where he wasn't in contact with the public. When the senior officers moved to suspend him, what you read about in the newspapers was the Met Firearms Command was extremely upset, and they threatened to hand in their weapons. They were so upset that one of their colleagues had been suspended, even when someone had died. Did you hear about anything like that?
I did hear about it, I read about it. I'm not involved in the case, so it would be inappropriate for me to comment on a live investigation. However... No,
but the Firearms Command handing in their weapons because somebody's suspended.
If I can perhaps correct that with respect, Mom, it was the police officers on the on response crews that muted that because of the way he was suspended, they felt it was inappropriate and were concerned about could it happen to them. The Firearms Command itself supervisor officers, so it would be CO19 or MO19 as it's now called, wouldn't have any control over how those officers handed the weapon in. They're volunteers, and if they felt that the process that was followed from what they knew was inappropriate, they've right to be concerned about if there's a shooting the following day, could that happen? But I'm not alive to all the investigation details, or indeed I'm not the Federation representative, so I'm only going on what I've heard about in the news and from what you've said there yourself.
Just finally, with the Carrick case, one of the things that people are surprised at was there were, I think, 9 different complaints against him over 20 years, and nothing happened. I mean, clearly, you know, he didn't go to court or anything like that, but 9 different complaints and nothing happened. Would it be the case that concern about the Police Federation stopped him from being suspended on any of those occasions? It's this issue about the Police Federation clearly defending its members come what may, but it stops more. I know you can't take the ultimate decision, but a concern about what the Police Federation will say that stops senior officers doing what, from a public's point of view, seems the obvious thing to do.
Yeah, again, we just don't have that power. We'll make representations about it. Now, again, I share your concerns. If there's been 9 opportunities that have been missed, that does raise concerns for me, because whenever an allegation is made, it goes into the relevant police department of professional standards. It's then looked at, that's then logged on what's on a system called Tribune, so it's there. So if you it used to be, if you had 3 complaints of any type, you had a complaint intervention scheme to be looked at. That would be dealt with by at least a chief inspector or above to go, what are the problems here? Again, at risk of commenting on what I don't know, I'm not sure if that has taken place over that period of time. I would sincerely hope it has. For me, you'd like to think if there's been at least 2 or 3 complaints of sexual assault or inappropriate behaviour, that's looked at and flagged. I suppose the difficulty for the police is that they might look at an allegation and go, well, it's not proven, therefore we can return them. But when you've got certain levels of crime, that should be ringing alarm bells to me about there's a pattern of behaviour here which is inappropriate, and it happens in other industries where you look at it, it would be dealt with. Again, I don't know what hasn't taken place within the internal system in the Metropolitan Police, to be honest. I know that I've had members who've been picked up for complaints, they've been tracked for the 3 complaints, and it's been dealt with very effectively, but I don't know what's happened in the local command from where the officer was, or what's happened with the Metropolitan Police Department professional standards.
Just quickly, because I'm conscious of the time, what you're saying is that, in your experience, if 3 complaints are made, that there'd be some sort of action, or, you know, looking at what would cause 3 complaints to be made.
Yeah, so it used to be called the Complaint Intervention Scheme, and if you look at the Code of Conduct, it's very onerous on any police officer, it's quite impactful, and I would challenge anybody, people in this room, to work to the Police Code of Misconduct. It's incredibly, I won't say oppressive, but it's there to make sure you stick to what should be done properly. You get the complaints, it's investigated, and it might be to have 3 complaints and they're just completely, you weren't there, you weren't on duty, that can be discounted. But it's complaints that get looked at. It's the substantive complaints that, is there a theme of behaviour? They should be picked up upon. I'm assuming the Metropolitan Police still do the 3 strikes and you get spoken to. You'd like to think after any complaint there's some intervention about behaviour and understanding it or not, but again it depends on the victim, it depends on the outcome and whether it's a substantive complaint or whether it's a vexatious complaint.
And absolutely finally, can you assure the committee that domestic violence, complaints about domestic violence are taken as seriously as any other form of sexual assault?
I would sincerely hope so, given that most domestic murders happen by people that are known to the victim. I would like to think that any crime is taken seriously within policing. Obviously you have to triage the responses, but domestic violence is particularly pertinent. I think there's a report recently about domestic violence in the police service in itself, about victims feeling that they can't afford to speak and not being dealt with properly. Again, it goes back to having a victim-centred approach on everybody that report crime, so I sincerely hope it is taken very seriously.
Can I just ask, you may not know this, did any of your members report concerns to the Police Federation about David Carey?
I'm not aware of it, but nationally at the Federation of England and Wales, we wouldn't deal with that. That would be perhaps more dealt with by the Metropolitan Police Federation, which is part of the overall federation of 43 forces across the country. Again, I'll have to ask them on that one.
Okay, thank you. Marco Longhi.
Thank you very much. Can I thank you for starting your depositions today with an apology, because I think victims deserved an apology, and I think not least your colleagues who also come in to do an honest day's work day in, day out, putting themselves in harm's way, also deserve an apology, because inevitably people do get tired with the same brush. I get that. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we rebuild trust. Clearly there has been a massive impact on the question of trust and trust in our police forces. Yes, trust has been lost because of what's happened, Cousins, Carrick, etc., and it's not just the Met Police. But there's also something about trusting the police to turn up when an armed burglary is taking place. And that doesn't happen and resources get blamed, but actually they turn up and dance the Macarena with Extinction Rebellion, and we talk about human rights, I think you were referring to the human right to protest. What about the human rights of those people who want to go about their daily lives unimpeded? I don't know what it is about police forces in Europe who don't stand to that kind of pandering to ECHR. They're all members of the ECHR and obey human rights, but they don't take the view. So it's about a question of judgment, interpretation, and therefore competence. So we talk about institutionalized misogyny. That may or may not be the case. I'm inclined to agree it may be the case. But this is a question of institutionalized incompetence and judgment that's failing in the police force as well.
I think there's, very good police officers. We certainly, as Mr. Cooke has referred to it earlier as well, is we do acknowledge there is a lack of experience in certain areas, and we know that we do have a shortage of investigative skills within policing across all the service. Incidents that you've referred to today, that your colleague has referred to, where a member of the public is ringing up the police on a 999 call, we would expect a police force to respond to that. I can't obviously respond to a specific incident. We would like to think that forces do respond to that. I also acknowledge, though, there are times where members of the public are having to wait longer than we would like them to for a variety of reasons. I don't have any data in front of me to talk about that. I think when we look at all of those incidents, we do, the police, it goes back to that mission, that clarity, and there are, we've referred to it earlier today, the criminal justice system. We really welcome a whole system review of the criminal justice system. We know from our members, and we've referred to it earlier today, that we know that victims, particularly in Crown Court, are having to wait up to 2 years before they get to their trial. And we also know that some of this has been compounded not just by COVID, but some of the challenges around capacity, resourcing within the judiciary. And though that is information that our members are providing us, the challenges for that area, having previously worked in criminal justice as head of a department, is that our witness care units are having to work with victims and to keep victims engaged for those periods of time. It's very traumatic for a victim to wait that length of time to get to trial. We know that sometimes they are being warned for court listings, they are then de-warned. All of those are traumatic. So there is we really welcome a whole review of the criminal justice system, and it's not just about policing, it's about our other partners within the judiciary, the Crown Prosecution Service. I know previously there has been mention around some of the challenges with the additional work with the Attorney General guidance that has been brought in, and I know some of those issues are being looked at by the Home Office, the Home Secretary, and also...
We are running very short of time, so if you could just shorten your answer slightly, that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, so we would expect, I would expect the police to turn up to incidents, but I recognise that sadly that has not been the case.
Okay. Mr. Cooke, when he was here before, when I asked him the question, what needs to change, we all know what needs to change. We'd like the police to get back to basics, we'd like things not to happen the way they have been happening. My point is, and when I was asking about how confident we are that change will happen, is that I don't have that clarity around what in practical terms is actually going to bring about change. When I pressed him on that point, he said, I need to inspect more, the inspectorate needs to inspect. Well, okay, that doesn't inspire me with confidence. How confident are you that we're going to get to a stage soon, or at least lay out a path, a journey, a direction of travel in which the public out there can have real trust in the police, and we'll get back to proper common sense policing?
I don't think it'll be a quick path to getting back to confidence in policing. I think some of the steps they can do of a very practical nature is let's get back to community-based policing, neighbourhood policing, putting police officers out there walking the beat. It was a tried and tested method, and it perhaps harks back to the good old days of, Dixon of Dock Green, for those that can remember it. That used to be the best option. However, the demands in policing have changed significantly now, with the types of crime we're investigating. However, with a significant increase in numbers that we want to put on the front line, if you get to speak to your police officers, how many of you this morning saw a police officer on the way to work? You don't see them because they're in the police vehicles driving around responding to crime. I've long advocated that you have police officers at the transport hub so you can speak to them, you can engage with them. We know that 600 police stations have been closed across the country in recent years because then the public can't go and engage with them. The only time you see a police officer is when you actually need help and you've dialed 999 or there's a major incident. That needs to change. We need to be seen as being part of the community. As I started 27 years ago at Barking and Dagenham. I had the Gascoigne estate, one of the biggest estates in Europe of its type. Part of my shift pattern was to spend time there to get to know the community. So when things happen, you've got those community links to build the bridge to understand. I think that will help on one level. That's a very localised level. But you then need an uprating of skill for national responses to types of crime, counter-terrorism, serious organised crime of that ilk, provided by the NCA, but also incorporating policing as well, because we can't forget that you've got local crime and national crime. It needs more numbers. When was the last time the government took a service level agreement with the amount of public we have now, a 4 million population increase in the last 10 years? Is the 145,000 police officers enough to deal with it? I suggest it isn't, by the fact that we are failing the public. We can't give the service we want to because we are constantly responding as opposed to being proactive. Certain elements can, National Crime Agency can, organised crime hubs can, but then that means that crime has had to take place in the first place to be investigated. We should be more preventative than ever before, but it's putting boots on the ground, to coin a phrase, to get there, show the visible face of policing. You can then deter and dissuade lots of crime. Going back to what Minister Abbott asked about domestic violence, you can't stop that, it's internal, but you can try and prevent it by being present so people don't feel safe to commit that type of crime in the first place.
Can I just
come
sorry,
back
Chair,
quickly,
add,
yes.
I would echo Steve's sentiments. We do need to reinvest in local policing because that is the foundation of policing. And I also support Dr. Rick Muir's report when he refers to there is that localised level and then that regional ability to forces to work on more complex crimes with those specialist capabilities, making sure we have the investment in the right training of the staff for those investigative skills. And then there is those national threats that we are dealing with, and we need to have that model. We also need the college in terms of the standards that they set, the authorised professional practice, that those are mandated and they are consistent across all forces, and then there is that inspection through the HMIC FRS.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask both of you, would you join the police again if you were 18 or 21? Would you still join the police?
I absolutely would.
You absolutely would.
I really
Yeah.
have to date have a really enjoyable career. Yes, it's had its ups and downs,
Yeah.
and every career has, but I would welcome and I would like to see more diversity within policing.
Great.
Sadly, I'd have to say no. I was asked at an interview last week. We were talking about our pay morale survey, which has just been launched. And with a heavy heart, I say no because of the way they pay, the pensions, the terms and conditions, the pressures on policing are such that if I say to myself, no, I wouldn't encourage my family to join at the moment. If it changes and it gets back to being a good level of remuneration, absolutely. It is vocational, it is a calling. It's disappointing to see that historically policing was undermined. If it's not a long-term career, you absolutely need experience to be able to do the things you do in policing. Much like yourselves, you need vast amounts of experience. You can't just bring new people and go, that's going to be happening. I have a real concern for the future that if we have people, if we get to 50% service under 5 years in the policing, that is going to have a huge impact because you need experience. We're not focusing on retention, but what's to keep me in policing? Nothing, because in 3 years' time I'll have 30 years service. I'll suffer a pension detriment by staying on. I'll suffer an allowance detriment. There's no point to stay on. And with policing as it is, it's not getting better any time quicker. So with a very heavy heart, it would be no.
Well, thank you for your honesty on that. Thank you. And thank you so much for your evidence to the session today. It's part of our inquiry into policing priorities, and we will be producing a report, and your evidence will be included in that. So thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.